Joining us, former Republican governor of North Carolina, Pat McCrory, and Richard Stengel and Ashley Parker are also still with us. Ashley, we heard from Miller's ex-father-in-law, Senator Bernie Moreno. It was really a heartbreaking account of the toxic situation going on in their family. Why is it, though, that we haven't heard from many other Republicans?
Well, it's been stunning how few Republicans have been willing to weigh in on this. And again, we should say these are just allegations now. But there was a time for both parties where it was sort of the bare minimum to be incredibly alarmed and express concern even against allegations, including allegations, multiple allegations from his ex-wife, allegations from more than one woman. But I will say what it really comes down to is this is Donald Trump's Republican Party. And so when you have a party that is led by a man who has been accused of sexual misconduct by dozens of women, who was found civilly liable of sexual abuse and defamation of E. Jean Carroll, and when you have a president who, for a period, palled around with notorious convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, it becomes a lot harder politically if you don't have any real courage to say that you believe all women or even some women some of the time.
It seems across the political spectrum it is getting harder and harder to find those immediate voices. Speaker Mike Johnson spoke to Politico. I want to show you what he had to say about the situation and get your reaction.
The allegations are serious. I think Max is taking them seriously. I think our colleagues are. But again, we have to allow this process to play out.
The president called him and told him, things aren't looking good for you.
Well, I mean, they don't look good right now, of course. But again, what should a speaker do in this case?
The process of an ethics investigation could take months. What do you make of Johnson's rationale, Governor?
Well, let me first say, as a mayor for 14 years of Charlotte, domestic violence was one of the most serious things that we had to deal with. About 25% of our killings were domestic violence. And so I'm shocked at the congressman's response on even comparing this to Donald Trump or not, or saying that, she cooked me dinner a week later. If you know anything about domestic violence, which he obviously has not studied or has been, where he's in total denial, that is about the worst answer anyone can give. And that interview that the congressman gave was horrendous. And
what about Speaker Johnson?
The second thing I do want to say, both political parties have a long line of their own defending their jersey during these types of incidents, all the way from congressman to president of the United States throughout my entire life. We've made exceptions because they're wearing our jersey. And to me, this is an individual matter, and people aren't being honest because they're interested in one thing, and that's holding on to power. This is all about power. It always has been. A power of an individual, maybe in his own family household, and the power of trying to hold on to the House or Senate. And both parties are willing to sacrifice their norms and their morals to do just that.
I do want to drill down on Speaker Johnson, though. People are looking to him for guidance.
To me, first of all, I like Mike a lot, Speaker Johnson a lot. He should have said, yes, there is something I can do. As a leader, he can say, get out of the race, and get out of the race right now. And I might say it in North Carolina, Chuck Edwards, who had not that type of degree of indiscretion, but he just resigned from a race today in North Carolina because he had done some very inappropriate things regarding communications with staff members. I've been an elected official for a long time, both a governor and a mayor and a city council member, and there's something in the water. Once someone, both men and women, but primarily men, are called honorable, they think they're either smarter, better looking, and funnier. And it's just not true, but they believe it, and they think they can get away with anything. And it's a small percentage, but you got to call these people out on it, on both parties who behave this way. And even if he didn't behave this way, and let's say he is innocent of this, his answers to the questions yesterday were horrendous as it relates to domestic violence.
Yeah, I want to get, Ashley, to how the voters are responding to this, because it speaks to not only, as the governor is alluding to, how politicians, lawmakers handle these kinds of circumstances, but also how they resonate with voters. Let's listen to how some of the constituents are reacting.
Do you think he should resign?
Absolutely. I mean, come on. You're supposed to be better than that. I don't want a woman beater in my Congress.
Well, if his conscience is treating him right, he would drop out if he did it. And if he's innocent, he should stay where he is. I can't read the man's mind.
I think for the betterment of the public, himself, his family, yes. Yes.
If it's a fact, yes. But then there's a lot of them up there that does that, isn't there? There's a lot of crooks in Congress, in the Senate, in all of them.
We're in this sad situation where there's so much skepticism. Does it surprise you that there was such a mixed bag there when Alex was talking to constituents?
Well,
I'm sorry.
That's all right. To Ashley.
Sorry. Yes and no. I mean, it's interesting. Some of these Republican lawmakers have said it's up to the voters. And one of the reasons that Donald Trump and other Republicans privately do very much want Max Miller to drop out, even if they're not willing to say so publicly, is for political reasons. Because in talking to people, this is a race where if he stays in, they very much think he could lose. And you hear some of that reflected in voter sentiment. And there is also an argument, some of these Republicans have said it's a family matter. But the thing that strikes me in all of this, and Senator Moreno yesterday talking about his 2-year-old granddaughter and her little blue bunny, which he said Max Miller wouldn't give back to them and held hostage. I mean, at the end of the day, it's heartbreaking for everyone involved, but most specifically this little girl. And there's an argument that if, as Miller claims, all he cares about is what's best for his daughter, whether or not these allegations are true, what is best for his daughter is not to have this play out in the halls of Congress and in the national media.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons Senator Moreno said that initially he didn't speak out. Rick, recent polling found that MAGA voters' tolerance for scandal from their party line candidates is sky high when compared to Democrats and actually even Republicans in general. Miller, you heard at the top there, cited Trump as an example of resilience and controversy, became president of the United States despite the Access Hollywood situation. Trump himself has actually warned Miller it doesn't look good for him. But is there actually, I'm using the word actually a lot, but is there real pressure on Miller at this point to change course, or is he just going to dig in through the election?
Well, the thing, Ariel, that we've seen and that we've been talking about for years is how Trump has eroded the moral fabric of the nation. And it's this idea, which he has demonstrated over and over, that winning somehow erases every moral stain or every moral culpability, that if you win, it means you didn't commit the crime, that you're not guilty. As we talked about in the last segment, he's a sociopath. And so you have Republican voters who are identifying with that. And Mr. Miller is identifying that by saying, essentially, if I win this race, that means I'm innocent, when in fact it has nothing to do with that. We have a culture now where the president blames the referees if he loses. And that's what we're seeing regular people do, too. And he's a small man, and he's identifying with a smaller man who's doing the same thing.